In this exhibition, I'm presenting the work Maggic Cube, a project that I started already in 2015 between Dakar and Milan. And in this work, what I'm mostly looking at, it's the impact of sort of performing culture through advertisement in the public space, and how does that then affect the way in which society look at themselves. In this case, I'm specifically looking at West African context, Dakaroise context. And what is interesting is that pretty much everywhere you go, you have this very predominant figure of the advertisement of stock cubes, of Maggi, Jumbo, you name it, there is, or Aja even. And it's very interesting to see that obviously the client, the people that they're talking to is mostly women. Reason why also in my work you have always female figures that are present, except that in the video. And it's interesting because I have these sentences, there are these sentences that are like, with Maggi, every woman is a star, or with Maggi, your husband is not going to look for a second wife. So it's very direct. The reason why I chose to focus on this specific product is because it was one of the first products that came into the West African market after the Berlin conference. And because of its anatomy and composition, it's a product that can stand in every kind of temperature, right? So even if it's 40 degrees under the shadow, it works. And it's also very much cheaper than spices. And so it became one of the key elements of the West African cuisine. And what is interesting is that if you ask anywhere, Maggi is really seen as being an African product, but that's not just, you know, in West Africa. If you go to India, if you go to Poland, it's the same relationship. So that's, but then in the case of West Africa, it's even more, obviously it's an imperial product. So how do we deal with that? And how do we deal with the legacy of this sort of cultural construction that it's presenting? So what I do in the images and somehow is a form of, I would say, like the construction of almost a semiotic language of this advertisement. And at the same time, I create a very strong relationship to, aesthetical relationship to those very sort of, I don't know, present imagery of West African culture, with the images of Maggic Dieye, Seydou Keita, Omar Ly, all amazing, I would say, photographers, but that somehow made me question the way in which they were sort of brought into a global art market economy, and how does that kind of image sort of, the circulation of that image sort of impacts the production, the artistic production really, of the new generations of photographers, of artists. And that's the reason why then in certain images you have these masks, where you have a white body obviously holding, you know, a black face, which are, by the way, screenshots that I took from the Maggi events, because they make these events of like 3 days in a row. It's like a festival of Maggi. But it's really like, what is the desire that you have by looking at those images? Is it actually like sort of, is it still with that exploratory sort of modus, or is it, yeah, it's pretty much that, I would say. And then also the fact that you have this, when Maggic Dieye was still alive, there was this thing of recreating the sets around the world, and people going into the sets, mostly white European or Western people, and being photographed as a subject sort of those very typical 50s Bamako style images. And so it's very much also on the desire aspect that I'm focusing with this, with the work. I mean, the thing is that Maggi is one of the many examples. You know, I could bring up Coca-Cola, I could bring up really anything, from the milk to the rice to, it's just, it was interesting for me to focus only on this one. First of all, because again, the aesthetics, the colors are very simple and very strong in your eyes, just as much as I'm trying to reproduce, sort of replicate here in this project. And it stays really in your memory. And plus there are also colors that sort of, how do you say, invoke sort of a sense of hunger too, which is the red and yellow, same one as McDonald's and etc. There's so much there's so much at stake when you talk about products, obviously Western products in Africa. What is their impact? And in the case of the Maggic Cube, consider that the way that is utilized, it's so, it's not just as you would do it here, maybe with, you know, one stock cube to make a soup. You have many of those stock cubes that are placed into one dish. And the reason why is because it's a country that, first of all, has a super high, like Senegal, I'm referring mostly to Senegal in this case. Consider that if you want to buy vegetables, it's way much more expensive than just having, you know, a stock cube. So like people general families have one dish a day. So you want to have that dish tasting good, you know what I'm saying? And so you put a lot of it, but then there's all other consequential issues that come along with the health issues. Nonetheless, you have there has been a huge peak in the past decades of hypertension given by, you know, the high quantity of sodium that is utilized within the dish. And so it's all somehow correlated, and there is obviously an important critique also on what is it that we're using, what is it that we're identifying as typical, as ours, and what is the actual impact that is having then on our, not just in a way that we envision ourselves, but on our bodies, literally. So, yeah. But I mean, you have the same thing happening then with powder milk. You know, even though you do have, I can speak for Senegal, you do have cows, and there are little companies that are trying to sort of invest locally, but that's the issue. Then you have all these other huge companies that are sort of creating this neoliberal sort of new capitalism. How do we deal with that? I mean, if you look at, you know, Thomas Sankara, what was he saying regarding new imperialism? Just look at the plate in which you're eating. Look at the rice in which that you're eating. I mean, the rice is surely not coming from Senegal. And the one that, there are companies that are trying, but the fact is that the state is not really putting the effort on financing also those companies. And then what happens is that it's anyway still much cheaper for the population to buy Indian or Chinese rice or whatever else. I mean, I started the project actually quite a while ago. When was it? 2015. The first time I started to like really work on all of this. It took a while, meaning that I always left it there, I say a little bit to marinate, which makes sense. Yeah, it took a while because it was also a question of me growing up and like really understanding what were the different facets and what was it that I really wanted to say with this project. Because initially, you know, I was really working with this background, but it wasn't very clear perhaps to me, you know, how I wanted to tackle this whole issue. And then further on, just a question of little details decided to come in. For instance, in the picture of, you know, the woman holding that element and then having this end, you know, covering up. It's like, these are like all other elements, you know, all things that you learn a little bit. Yeah. That. I could say that the last part of the project started to really take shape in 2019. Because yeah, I had to do this, I wanted to do this exhibition in Milan, which was a solo exhibition focused on Maggic Cube, and it pushed me in somehow to like reframe also some of the concept and to bring it forward. The images, like the way that they're composed, as you can see, it's not simply, you know, a shot image like. There's many layers in the sense that you might have a background that I painted, and then you have a picture that I took in the studio, but then it's cut off, and then it becomes a collage, but it still recreates the composition that I wanted to present. And also the fact of using archival images in somehow, like in terms of archival images, or so where I did, for instance, screenshots of, again, this huge Maggi event. And then I sort of started to cut out the characters that were present in it, and insert them in the picture. Also because it was interesting for me to create this sort of not understanding in which space you are within the image, which is it looks flat, but at the same time it's like a whole other dimension.